This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Qatar 24 was a messy Grand Prix. It all began on Saturday with a soft penalty for Max Verstappen having driven unnecessarily slowly on a prep lap and having a minor tangle with George Russell. The race came and went, Max inevitably came out on top. However, he had some choice words for George post-race. I've never seen someone trying to screw someone over that hard, and for me I've lost all respect. Then speaking to Viaplay, translated from Dutch to English, he always does it very nicely in front of camera, but when you're sitting with him in person, he's just a different person. I can't stand that, and then you might as well just fuck off. And even Ted Kravitz paraphrased on his notebook from Max to George, "You and your FIA mates, I hope you're happy." George's behaviour has clearly struck a nerve here, right, with Max, and it's not like it's their first rodeo, is it? But honestly, given the uptick in performance of George as of late and the level of dominance that Max is carrying into 2025, I think this could be Senna-Prost levels of regen, because their competitive rivalries, Senna to Prost, Verstappen to Russell, there are a lot of similarities. So my name's Tommo, let's talk about it. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost are two of the greatest to ever do it, no question, and their rivalry is possibly the most iconic of them all. These two clashed just as much on track as they did off it, with Suzuka 89 and 90 being the two most kind of well documented examples, right? They were both absolutely fierce competitors, but went about things in very contrasting ways. Sound familiar? Senna was a very, very hard racer, would often push over the limits and had an incredible God-given knack of extracting performance from a Formula 1 car. You can substitute Senna for Verstappen in this phrase and it be equally accurate. Prost was calculated and pragmatic. His nickname, the Professor, came from his academic-like style, be that on car setup, strategy or race execution. You can substitute Prost for Russell here and it would be pretty equally accurate too. Senna would accuse Prost of getting preferential treatment from the FIA. Sound familiar? Prost would publicly criticise Senna's style, labelling it unsportsmanlike and beyond the limit. Sound familiar? Ayrton Senna had a hugely passionate fan base, especially of course in Brazil, and there may have been other options for Brazilian drivers on the grid, but it felt like they were all in on him. Prost, on the other hand, wasn't a hugely popular name, not even the biggest driver necessarily in France, right? You had René Arnoux, Didier Pironi, Jean Alesi. Like, Prost never captured the level of attention that Senna did. Sound familiar? Whether you're discussing Senna v Prost or Verstappen v Russell, it's a similarity in their desire to win, yet a polarisation of styles going on. When you have that, you have the potential to build an iconic sporting rivalry. Now, I've not quite had the Suzuka-esque touch points between Max Verstappen and George Russell, but the ingredients are absolutely there going into 2025. It was an out-and-out championship fight that really ignited the fuse between Senna and Prost, and that's all we're waiting for Verstappen versus Russell. Okay, here we go. TOMMO'SRacingGoods.com is live, my merchandise website, hosted by today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Of course, tees, hats, for sale now. Get them while they're hot. Squarespace is the perfect home if you want to build your very own e-commerce platform, big or small, just like I have. Manage inventory, SEO, imagery, it can all be done. It's an absolute breeze. If I can do it, you definitely can. I'm chuffed with how these designs came out, and I'm chuffed with how the website that I'm selling them on looks. Thousands of beautiful drag and drop templates at your fingertips with Squarespace's AI-powered design intelligence tool, bringing it all together. Squarespace is free to try. It's only when you want to publish your finished website live to the world that you have to pay anything, and when that time inevitably comes around, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to get 10% off of your very first website or domain. George Russell was really impressed me in this second half of the season in particular. And to be honest, I think I have been guilty of underrating George for a lot of his career, to be fair. Sure, he got his win in 22, but the car was all over the place that year. And then last year in 23, Lewis was convincingly outscoring him in the races. Combine that with a plethora of unforced errors from George over his time in F1, and he's got a reputation for being a bit crashy for a reason. It's taken me a while to really click with George and feel like he's that guy and he's got that dog in him, but I think that time is now. The way he's adapted to this 2024 Mercedes and absolutely hammered the nail in the coffin of Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes career, it's very impressive, you gotta say. Like, Lewis will rightly go down as one of the greatest of all time. Right now, well, I know he's going to be 40 next year, but he could still be hovering around the levels of his prime, right? It depends who you ask. maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I think George's ability, particularly in qualifying, to firmly outclass Lewis this year is, you know, it's more of a reflection of George's talent than it is a slant on Lewis. And yes, Lewis is out the door at Mercedes. Is that going to be affecting his motivation, Mercedes' motivation to support him? Probably. Do we know to what extent? Nobody knows. But I've never seen Lewis Hamilton in his entire F1 career be as despondent as he is right now. It's in a big part because George is absolutely destroying him in qualifying. Like, it's really not even that close anymore. But look, the evidence has always been there, right? George is a back-to-back GP3 and Formula 2 champion, won those both in pretty convincing fashion as well. Then he jumped into an absolutely trash Williams and helped develop and grow that car and grow himself during his 3 years at Williams. You know, 2 years more than he felt he needed. But I do actually think that difficult period at Williams has helped produce the driver that he is today. I mean, that P2 qualifying at Spa was special. Even P3 in difficult conditions in Sochi. Over a lap, George has always been a demon. And moving to Mercedes, a long-time, a 7-time world champion, one of the greatest of all time in Lewis, I think has only helped him improve. He's not perfect, but he's getting there. Can George take on Max over a lap? Absolutely. He's already doing it. That goes without saying, right? And you can definitely make an argument George is the best qualifier in Formula 1. Up there at least with Charles, who I think it probably is. Even Lando and Max, of course, right? These guys are fantastic over a lap. Let me know in the comments, if you were building your dream F1 driver as of right now today, who would you put in charge of qualifying? Now, does George have the racecraft and race management to back up the pace? I think there's still work to be done there for sure. More often than not, Lewis seems to be able to just get more performance out of the car when they're qualifying close together over a race distance. And George is often criticised for being too focused on beating Lewis than he is actually being kind of pragmatic about his own race. But the thing is though, going into 2025, Lewis is leaving, Andrea Kimi Antonelli is coming in. It's going to take him time to get accustomed. You know, there's not the unlimited testing like there was back when Lewis made his debut as a rookie. I expect it's going to take time for Antonelli to get up to pace, and George is going to have to worry about him too much. Certainly not worrying about him more in his debut season that he's had to worry about Lewis Hamilton this year, right? Which he hasn't had to worry about Lewis Hamilton so much because Lewis has struggled so much in qualifying. George can focus on maximising his own races rather than always looking at what the guy in the other garage is doing, which I think is somewhat true. And I think that is a bit of a weakness. But then again, when you're going into Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes, maybe that is actually the smartest approach, to just focus all your attention on beating Lewis, right? It's like if someone went in alongside Max Verstappen and actually wanted to take over at Red Bull, maybe their focus is better to be just, I need to beat Max every weekend, or I need to beat Lewis every weekend like George has tried to at Mercedes. George has had a fantastic run as of late. He would have 3 race wins to his name if that disqualification at Belgium never happened. And you know what? Honestly, I think in my post-season ratings, where Hulkenberg struggled a bit as of late, Piastri's had his wobbles, and I think George has only got better. He could well be in for top 3 contention in my driver ratings. I think he could. And finally, for the first time in his Formula 1 career, there's confidence that going into 2025, he will have a car that he can compete for a Drivers' Championship in. But if he's going to do it, Max is the man to beat. To overcome the inevitability of Max Verstappen in 2025, it's going to take a Herculean effort from whoever will try. Lando came up short this year, and ultimately I don't think the team or the driver were fully prepared to take on the greatest of all time, arguably, in his most dominant period, prime period of his life. When you put it like that, Lando coming up short against Max, like, fair enough. Max could actually be the GOAT. Like, he could actually be the GOAT. But something I think Lando's really struggled with in his battles with Max is his lack of comfort fighting Max in the trenches. Because Verstappen will drive over the line, as did Senna before him, as did Schumacher before him as well. Max, Michael and Ayrton were prepared to go to that place, and that puts the onus on you. It's your decision as a competitor whether you want to meet him there and drive his way or not. And I think that's something that Lewis had to kind of struggle through in 2021, because Max would just bully him off track. Look at Imola, look at Catalunya in 2021. Max knew he could get away with those moves, pushing Lewis off because it's lap 1. You might not agree with it, but that's how the rule book's written, and Max is playing to the whistle. Fast forward this year, and I think Max played Lando like a fiddle in Austin, To be honest, in Mexico, Max demonstrated he is prepared to drive flagrantly outside of the rules in order to keep position. He is prepared to do this, and are you? I don't think that's a place where Lando and Lewis naturally operate. I think they're both very kind of fair racers at their core. Although, to be fair, Lewis in his junior formulas and early doors in F1 was known for his aggressiveness. You could argue Lewis was more Max-esque early on in his career, and he's kind of mellowed, I think, as time's gone on. And by the way, this approach that Max takes, like, he's said it himself, I'm not just like speculating here. After clinching the title in Vegas, he sat down with Lawrence Barretto and had a really interesting chat and dropped this nugget of quite insightful, I think, information.
Yeah, I mean, there have been tough races, questionable moves or moments, but I know what I'm doing. I'm fully in control of what I'm doing. Sometimes, yeah, of course with a thought behind it, but I'm well in control of what I'm executing on track. Sometimes it's necessary, you know, and yeah, I will do everything I can to win.
I will do everything I can to win. That is straight out of the Senna-Schumacher playbook. But you know what? Is that not also out of the George Russell playbook, right? Just same gift, different packaging. Max complained about George in a way I've not seen one driver complain about another for a very long time. Russell pushing for Max to get this penalty in Qatar. It riled at Max in a way that you don't really want to rile him up as your competitor, because that seems to unleash the beast in Max, and he won the race. But look, the reason I think they're cut of the same cloth, I mean, back to that quote from Max, I will do everything I can to win. Is George not just doing the same by trying to get Max a penalty, doing everything he can to win, just in his own way? Back to Senna and Prost, right? You don't win all the titles that they do and be competitive as them two were without being absolutely determined to win and being fierce competitors. The reason they clash so much is because they went about it in such a different way that there could be no mutual respect there, really. And the same goes for Max and George. Max is really hard on track. Okay, he'll push the limits and push over them. He's comfortable in that place, and he's very real, very unfiltered on the radio and in interviews. He's very himself, he's very Dutch, right? And that's why he's loved by so many, but also hated by so many who just don't vibe with that. George, on the other hand, is very prim and proper, very PR trained, head of the GPDA as well, which I guess Max is referring to if he says all your mates at the FIA, because he is head of the GPDA, right? It carries weight. All the drivers grass each other up on the radio. Don't get me wrong, Max is guilty of it just as much as anyone else, but it feels like George is like, when he gets a chance, like when Lando did the almost jump start, which kind of was a jump start, but he didn't get penalised for it in Saudi, George was like, straight on it. I think it's fair to say George is a fairer wheel-to-wheel racer on track, but he'll kick up more of a stink than Max if he feels like you've wronged him or you've done something naughty. To use a political analogy, I think Max is more of a hard-nosed union leader. I think George is more of a career politician. Both want influence, both want their own way, and both go about it in very different styles. And look, Max obviously is not a carbon copy of Ayrton Senna, right? I think Max possesses much of the pragmatism that Alain Prost is so well known for, right? Really understanding the rules, big racing IQ. We saw that in Qatar with the double yellows that he saw, and then he dobbed Lando straight in it, right? Which again is the kind of thing George would do as well, right? So Max, it's not like Max isn't guilty of doing these things. Like, again, they all do it. And also, I don't think George is just a carbon copy of Alain Prost, right? I think Russell possesses a lot of that inherent, natural, one-lap pace gift that Ayrton had. But again, it's like two different ways of going about having the exact same mantra, which is to do everything you can to win. Now, of course, much of the intensity between Senna and Prost was a product of the fact that it was mainly them two going at it, kind of like we saw in 2021 with Max and Lewis, kind of like we saw in the early Mercedes years with Lewis and Nico. Patrese, Mansell, PK Berger, these guys featured occasionally in the Senna-Prost years, but they weren't the main show. The difference is now is that Max and George don't have the stage to themselves, and I guess there's two pairs from two other teams who will be nipping at their heels in 2025. Lando's one-lap prowess is phenomenal, you cannot doubt that. His ability in qualifying is second, arguably to none, right up there at the sharp end. Does he have the dog to fight in the trenches in a way that I think Max and George are more comfortable doing? That's the question for me. He will have learned a lot from 2024, and as long as he focuses that learning in a positive way, I think he can improve. But when things are this competitive and this tight at the top, you've got to make it your absolute everything. You can't afford to leave anything on the table, and you've got to be prepared to make enemies, I think, amongst the other drivers and amongst other fan bases. And is that a place where Lando's prepared to go? I guess we'll see. Oscar, I think, has more of a cutthroat, elbows out, aggressive nature to his driving than Lando, in my opinion. He's also very close to Lando's one-lap performance ceiling, although Lando gets to that ceiling way more consistently than Oscar does. I think Oscar does struggle with consistency, but he's shown that he can do it. He can get there. He just needs to do it more. But he's only had 45 Grand Prix versus Lando's 127, so fair enough, right? Next year is a huge opportunity for Oscar to show what he's about, right? Take what he's learned from this season. I think he will be very pragmatic. I think he will be almost Prost-esque, but he's got that aggressive side to him that I can just see him fighting with Max and George in the trenches and just not being fazed by it because he's so chilled out. The biggest question mark around Oscar is just whether he can do it consistently enough over the course of the season, because I've got no doubt he can do it every now and then. But can he make it a regular thing? Charles Leclerc is Max's OG rival, right? And when we see them go wheel to wheel, there is nothing quite like it. Charles knows how to race Max, and Max knows how to race Charles. And they do meet each other at that point, and it's unbelievable. I mean, Silverstone 2019 is one of my favourite F1 races of all time because of these two entirely. But what I love about Charles in particular is that he can fight Max's way, but also when he's going wheel to wheel with others, like his racecraft, I think, is probably the best in Formula One, I would say. I mean, just look at Qatar this weekend gone. In the sprint race, him and Lewis, impeccable of what I consider to be hard racing. Charles and Oscar as well in the main race. There's a quality little bit of wheel to wheel racing that they're doing, and I think Charles is just always there showing what I think good, hard, fair racing should be. Charles has that dog in him, no question. If Ferrari give him that car, he will absolutely be a massive thorn in both Max and George's sides in 2025. And then there's Lewis. Look, there's so many unknowns going into his first season at Ferrari at 40 years of age after a very, very poor end to his Mercedes career. Can he get back to his best? Because if he can, then everyone's got something to worry about at the front. Lewis is battle hardened, 18 years it will be by next year he'll have been in Formula One. And Fernando is proving that age is just a number. It's a lot to ask for him to be really competitive at the sharp end in a brand new team with a completely different way of going about things when he's got such a learned approach from running Mercedes engines his entire career and spending almost all of it over McLaren and Mercedes, literally all of it. Look, I can't sit here with confidence and say that I believe he will be in the fight for a title next year. I think it's too competitive with drivers who really know their hardware, but I'd be an idiot to say that there's no chance either, right? Because Lewis is one of the greatest of all time. He's seen firsthand in 2021 how Max races him, and Lewis has shown, we saw it in Hungary this year, he won't make concessions for Max anymore. If Max is going to drive in a way that he deems too aggressive, he'll just let him crash into him. And of course, like George and Lewis, I mean, they've had their fair share of tangles as teammates. Imagine what it'll be like when they're not teammates anymore. Oh, mate, please, Lewis. I so want you to be good next year. Not sure if it's going to happen, but I really want it, because both McLaren drivers, both Ferrari drivers, Max and George, scrapping, these six going at it for a title in 25. It could be so good. It could be so good. Thoughts and feelings as always in the comments below. TOMMO'SRacingGoods.com if you want to buy my merchandise. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. My name's Tomo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.